Nobody understands their own football team like their own fan base. And admittedly, national media messes up a lot. EJ and I are a national show. We cover the entire league. We try to be as granular as we can for every single team, but there are storylines and things that even we gloss over that other fans tend to get frustrated about. And so we dedicated an entire show to that. You know, we kind of ripped off this concept from Kevin Clark, who is wonderful as well, by the way. So thank you to him for this inspiration. But we asked all of you to tell us what the national media gets wrong about your team. And we had some really, really fun responses. So we're going to go through 5 of our favorites that we picked out. We got dozens. Like, we could have done multiple shows on this, but we had 5 topics that we found really interesting that either the national media gets wrong or that maybe the national media doesn't talk about. And we're dedicating our whole show to that. So before we get into it, EJ, my friend, how are you?
I'm excited because this one's dedicated to the fans. We love our fans. We love all you bootleggers out there. We love the interactions we have with you. We basically just opened the floor and said, all right, this one's yours. We're gonna give you the floor. You can clear your chest and we'll acknowledge all those things. And I think it's a great concept. Again, thanks to Kevin. He's a gem. And this one's going to be fun. We get to dig into some stuff that we haven't had a chance to really sort of lift the hood up on and poke around and see what's down there. So I think that makes for a great episode.
Well, our first narrative that the national media, I don't want to say is ignoring, but maybe underreporting. And this comes from Sam at SP Snyder on Twitter. He said, no national media is discussing what Jeff Hafley was cooking on defense. And I agree. This is a very underreported talking point outside of, obviously Packers circles. But nobody's looking at the Packers defense as one of the best defenses in the NFL, when if you're looking at most metrics that matter, they are. Like, this is legitimately the best Packers defense that I can remember in a while. Like, honestly, maybe since their last Super Bowl run, 15 years ago, something like that. They're aggressive, they're disciplined, but they also play a really unique style. I would even say it's kind of a modern style. And that's that this is one of those few teams that blitzes, like actually blitzes less than calling simulated pressures. And the difference between a simulated pressure and an actual blitz, and common term for that's going to be a fire zone. Like, typically when you talk to coaches, fire zone is referencing rushing 5. A simulated pressure is where you're only rushing 4, but you're simulating a fire zone by bringing a linebacker, bringing a nickel, bringing a safety, a corner, whatever, and then dropping out somebody who is showing as a pass rusher. You drop them out, and you're just swapping one of those guys for a rusher from a different angle. They call it a simulated pressure because it looks like fire zone, but it's not actually fire zone. And the Packers do that at the 6th highest rate in the entire NFL, while being fairly average to below average in true blitz rate. As far as their coverages, I don't want to say it's vanilla, but they like what they like, right? It's very cover 3 heavy on early downs. And then on 3rd down, they play man coverage like 46% of the time, which is crazy high. So again, they present a lot of single high coverages, whether it's man or zone. They do what they do. They don't blitz a whole lot, but they call a bunch of different fun simulated pressures to make it still seem like they're bringing it. And they get a lot of pressure because of that. They get a lot of free rushers. They create winnable one-on-ones for their guys that actually can win one-on-ones. And it's just a refreshingly modern defense that is so far and away better than everything that they had like the last 4 to 5 years. And I agree. I think that's a very underreported storyline this year, that the Packers defense is one of the league's best.
Feels cohesive to me, which is the word that it hasn't felt for years past. Last year, Packers defense was the gang that couldn't shoot straight, even though they had good talent. And again, they were under different leadership. Now under a new leader, they've put it together and it feels like they're playing together. So first off, to Packers fans that say we never talk about you, because you were in the comments last week and you said we quote unquote never talk about you. You are literally poster kids for 2 out of the last 3 episodes. So buck up, campers. But this is definitely a topic worth talking about. So again, this year under a new leader, very different story. Number 11 scoring defense, sixth best or lowest in EPA per play against, ninth in sacks, 10th best least rushing yards allowed per game. This is a defense that's playing well on the front end, on the back end. And Xavier McKinney, we have to talk about as, I think, the best free agent addition in the league. I don't think any free agent that came to a new team has made more impact than Xavier McKinney has for the Packers. That's not to say he is the only thing working for them, but he is certainly a huge thing that's working for them and making the rest of that defense, both front end and back end, work because they're using him in pass pressures, like you talked about, and simulated pressures. His pressure rate's really good, and his coverage rates in the back end are also awesome. Jair Alexander is getting some help for once and looking awesome because he has played at a good level. Now, a lot of people said last year, oh, he dropped off. He was trying to do too much. And you see this with great players who are trying to make up the gaps in the defense, and they're doing 1.5 jobs or really running outside their role. And overall, the performance suffers, not only for them, but for the whole defense. Again, he doesn't have to do anybody else's job in that secondary. And so he's shining as we know he can. And then Evan Williams is a steal from down the draft board that I'm just going to take a tiny victory lap on because I came away from the University of Oregon's Pro Day. I'd watched his film the night before, and I came away and I texted a friend of mine who's an agent, and I said, I don't know, man. I think there's more there than people are letting on. Like, people are talking about him as a special teamer, as a height, weight, speed guy. I said, he looks really fluid. And I went back and watched more of the tape after that and thought, I don't know why more people aren't talking about him. Reached back out to my agent friend and said, I think there's something there. I think this guy could play certainly as a sub on a base defense. He's not just a special teamer, and I think he's a guy that could grow into a role on the base defense. Well, grow into is like 5 weeks. He has got a role on their base defense. He is contributing every single week. Packers fans are thrilled about him. And the secondary is set up to look very good for the next couple of years with just those two safeties. Obviously, Jair's there. And then the pass rush, which, again, had horsepower last year but couldn't get it together, is getting home this year in different ways that you talked about. And the overall effect is the Packers don't have to boat race anybody anymore. They can count on their defense playing very good, solid, cohesive defensive structures that are going to hold people down. And then LaFleur and the offense can go off and do what they do, and it's a good combination.
How did you go an entire segment about the Packers defense without talking about Javon Bullard? That's your guy. You love Javon Bullard.
I did love Javon Bullard. He has had a, let's say, a circuitous route thanks to everything we're talking about. But, in terms of getting everybody to contribute, all those guys down the board that we thought, oh, well, this guy could really make a difference for it. And when the overall structure is not working like it wasn't last year, I mean, Packers fans were openly wringing their hands and saying, this is terrible. Like, this is atrocious. You're not going to get the Evan Williams storylines. Like, he's not going to thrive in a defense that's struggling, or Bullard, or anybody else that's coming in. And, it's one of those things like a rising tide lifts all boats, right? Hafley had to come in and get the ship straightened out. And once he does, everybody starts thriving off that and saying, hey, I can come in and do the thing I'm really good at. Again, coaches are putting them in the position to do that. They didn't have a guy like McKinney in the back end that they could count on for a lot, because they can leave him alone to do a lot of things, whether it's coming forwards or going backwards versus the pass. And that frees up the rest of the defense. It's like having a really good left tackle and saying, okay, that's your guy. You don't need any help. We'll arrange everything else around that. Xavier McKinney has kind of been that center, tent pole for that defense, saying, all right, like, you can run everything around me. I don't need help. In fact, I'm going to help out all the things around me. And the sum total of those two things, Hafley's scheme and Xavier McKinney really shoring up that back end, has allowed everybody to just go freaking off.
I think my favorite tweet that I saw last week, and I can't remember who said it, but it was so funny. And they said the best part of watching the Packers this year is seeing the race for who has the most interceptions between Xavier McKinney and Jordan Love, which I thought was perfect. Which, by the way, I do want to note Dan McDermott, who works with us, he's at Underdog Fantasy. He's a big Packers fan, and he submitted a take to us that I want to bring up briefly because it made me think about the Jordan Love interceptions a little bit differently. And we've talked about the Jordan Love INTs for weeks at this point, where we're like, that's the one thing that like might come back and bite this team is if he's turning it over repeatedly. But Dan had an opinion on this that genuinely made me think about it slightly differently. And I want to know if other Packers fans agree with this. So Dan said, Jordan Love's risk-taking / short memory are his superpowers. Packers fans remember, especially towards the end, and now Jets fans see how painfully conservative Rodgers can be, taking sacks, avoiding throws over the middle of the field, etc. It's refreshing to see a quarterback completely unafraid to push the ball down the field, taking more high-risk, high-reward throws. More importantly, it's awesome to see him not turtle up as soon as he throws a pick. It's too convenient and not totally accurate to say he's Favre 2.0, but if there's any comparison, it's that he's fearless and will keep firing, which I believe is a positive for him and this team. That made me think about it a little bit differently because it is true. Like, he will throw an absolutely horrendous interception, but that won't stop him from throwing it 60 yards down the field and dropping it in the bucket to make up for that with explosive plays. And you just hope that on balance, he's getting more of those explosive plays than he is getting interceptions. And I guess when your defense is this good, you can do that because you trust them to get a stop and you trust them to have your back. And that's part of the reason why the Packers are a top 3 team in the NFC, because if your quarterback is going to do it, you should at least make sure that you can trade 7s for 3s, right? Like if he throws a back-breaking pick and it gives him an easy 3, but then he comes back and he gets a 7, you're still +4 in the averages. So that kind of made me think about it a little bit differently. I still wish that he wouldn't throw those picks, but if you're going to throw those picks, you should at least still have the big plays to go with it, and he has the big plays to go with it.
Somebody said to me after we brought that up that LaFleur is comfortable with it. And if he wasn't, it would change. And some people might say, oh, well, the quarterback's just going to do what he wants. Not in LaFleur's system. Like, he got Rodgers to change to using a lot of things he didn't like when Aaron is intransigent. Let's put it that way.
Oh, good word.
if LaFleur wants to change something the quarterback's doing, he is going to do it. And because this continues with Jordan Love, somebody brought it up and said, yeah, exactly that. LaFleur is comfortable with the ratio right now. If he wasn't, he would be changing it. And to me, I know the Favre comparison happens because of the jersey and play style, but to me, it seems like a much more physically talented Gardner Minshew. Like, Gardner Minshew will throw it up, right? He will not stop throwing it up. And that comes back to bite him usually. In the beginning, when Minshew starts for a team, usually the first month is pretty electric because all the receivers are like, hey, man, this guy's going to give me a chance. He is going to throw into coverage and say, go get it. And that has positive results, and everybody goes, aha, this is what we're missing. Well, usually the book on Gardner is after about a month, he can't knock that down, and the interceptions start to pile up, and the big plays aren't there to replace them. Jordan Love has so much more talent, physical talent, than Gardner Minshew does. And he is paying it off, right? He is getting the Packers points on balance when you look at the entire thing, the interceptions, the points off the turnovers, and all the touchdowns he's throwing. And LaFleur is comfortable with that. So it's likely to continue because, again, talking about complementary football, having a good defense, having an explosive offense that can be explosive positively or negatively, but in balance, it's coming out in your favor. LaFleur's he's gonna roll with a hot hand, and Jordan Love, more than 50% of the time, has the hot hand.
Speaking of Dan and Underdog, by the way, our show is brought to you by Underdog, obviously. They're our biggest partner. We work with them every single week, and we have for years now. They quite literally make all of this go. And so if you haven't played Pick'ems on Underdog, we're only halfway through the season. You have plenty of time. You could still do that. Maybe make your Packers watching a little bit more interesting every single week. Although right now, the free picks are not any Packers players. It's Jalen Hurts on Sunday. And because we're in basketball season on Friday and Saturday, which I think this video is going live on Friday, it's LeBron. So If you're doing NBA pick'ems, unfortunately, there are no baseball pick'ems anymore because the Dodgers just won the World Series, but we still got basketball, we still got football, we still got basically every other sport going. So if you want to do that with NBA or football or both, again, you got the LeBron and the Jalen Hurts free picks. Use our promo code BOOTLEG either at the QR code on the screen or at the link in the description below, and you'll also get a deposit bonus up to $1,000 as well on top of the free picks that you get. And all the promotions that they do throughout the week, whether it's boosts and whatnot. So thank you to Underdog again for making all of this possible. Thank you to all of you that play pick'ems with us every single week. Ideally, you're doing a lot better than I am the last couple weeks. I broke even.
I was waiting for that.
But I'm trying to get back in the green and not just breaking even. Hopefully, tonight's Texans game, we're recording this on Thursday morning, will get me in the green. Now, speaking of the Texans, again, we are not going to have a reaction to the Texans-Jets TNF game in this show because it hasn't happened yet. But I do want to talk about CJ Stroud leading up to this game because there was a very interesting note by a fellow Texans fan that said CJ Stroud has regressed as an individual, i.e. the national media is ignoring CJ Stroud regressing as an individual. And that made me think, as a national media member, do I agree with that? Is that true? Like, not just a national media member perspective, but also as a Texans fan. Do I agree with that? And I don't think I do. Because if you're looking at this Texans offense, and especially if you're looking at Stroud's production, except for a couple bad games that were not really his fault, in my opinion, he's got a pretty healthy adjusted completion percentage, which takes into account throwaways and everything like that. Passer rating, big time throw percentage, turnover worthy play percentage. Like, he's taking care of the ball and at least is above average in terms of big time throw rate and kind of bailing his offense out of sticky situations. Even yardage wise, like, he's still on pace to clear 4K. He's probably going to end up around 4,300 on this pace, which is fine by modern standards. I would even say that's above average by modern standards. You know, TDs are relatively low. Like, I think he's on pace to finish with 22 or 23, but that's not terrible. And his interception rate is not that high either. But it still just feels like this Texans offense is constantly getting bogged down, right? And so people are naturally saying, okay, well, it's CJ's fault. Like, he's just not playing as well. Because you're looking at all the sacks this team takes and all the third and longs. Like, every time you look up, they're in like 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11. And you're like, that's a Stroud problem. Like, the fact that they're even getting to 3rd and long that often, that's a Stroud problem. And I don't think it is. And you can call it copium all you want, but I look at this team and the problem is literally Kenyon Green. Like, that is the issue. Yes, there is health problems like Mixon's missed games, Nico's missed games, now Stefan's out for the year. But almost every single terrible play this offense has been because of the interior offensive line, and specifically because of Kenyon Green at left guard. He got benched. His backup then immediately got hurt. He got thrown back into the game, immediately lost again, immediately gave up pressure. And EJ, you've seen some bad guard play in Chicago this year. Kenyon Green has given up the most pressures by any guard in the entire NFL. Like, it's been horrific. And Stroud still hasn't taken the most sacks in the league, but it's close. I think he's at 22, but 17 of those 22 sacks were under 2.5 seconds. Like, as in just immediately losing, like having zero shot. So I look at this Texans offense and I say, that is not a Stroud problem. That is an offensive line problem, which in a way is also an offensive coordinator problem. Because last year, the Texans offensive line was super banged up, and Bobby Slowick did a wonderful job kind of covering up for those warts with, you know, heavier personnel groupings, more 6-man pass pro, more 7-man pass pro, tons of play action. They're running a lot less play action this year. They're down to 22nd in play action rate, which, I'm sorry, if you have a left guard that literally can't pass block, you should probably run more play action. They're not doing it. They are running a lot more, or not a lot more. They're running about the same rate of under center, but less play action, which means you're doing straight drop back passing from under center with a left guard that's getting caved in, which means by the time CJ's hitting the back foot of his drop, he literally can't go anywhere. So like if you're going to do that, you should at least be from the gun so that CJ has a little bit more space and he can get it out quicker. To me, it's a Kenyon Green problem and it's a Bobby Slowick problem because it's a Kenyon Green problem. It's not a CJ Stroud issue. And I think any Texans fan that's looking at just the numbers and, you know, they're not seeing like a 5,000 yard pace and a 35 touchdown pace, and they're like, oh, CJ's taking a step back. I really don't think he is. The only reason this team is 6-2 is because A, the defense is playing extraordinarily well, and B, in like the 4 to 5 plays a game that you need CJ to step up and make a crazy throw, he's making a crazy throw. They're just a worse version of the Chiefs. Like that's literally what they are. Like they shouldn't be 6-2, but they are because they have a great head coach, a great defense, and a great quarterback, and everything else is shitting the bed. So does that mean they're going to beat the Jets? I have no idea. I don't think it's Stroud though. Like he's not the problem.
I don't think he's regressed for that narrative. Has he regressed? It's a very easy narrative. There's even a name for it, right? Sophomore slump. Everybody's waiting for the sophomore slump. Will he experience the sophomore slump? He's experiencing a sophomore change. There's a couple factors, more than a couple factors, few factors that play into that. You mentioned a lot of them. One is he set the bar really, really high. Had one of the greatest rookie seasons ever by a quarterback. So it's going to be hard to do that again. And by that, I mean, 5,000 yards and 30 touchdowns like you were talking about. He has good stats. The offense has changed. Mixon is a fundamentally different part of this offense than Singletary was last year. They're leaning on him more. Nico is more and alpha than he was even last year. Last year, they were spreading that load around a little bit more. People thought that was going to continue with the addition of Diggs and Tank coming back healthy. And they thought, oh, well, it turns out, no, they leaned harder in the other direction. When Nico is there and healthy, he is the alpha, and the offense looks good as a Mixon-fueled big play shot to Nico offense, which more or less resembles what they were doing last year, but like with the dials turned up. Well, Nico got hurt, and like you said, they've experienced some offensive line problems. The Slowick thing you bring up, which is most interesting to me, because last year their offensive line was not great, and Slowick went to great lengths to get around that and keep and create offensive production that honestly I don't think he should have been able to do, but he did, and that was some of the real magic of the Texans last year. This year, it seems like he's almost more locked into going, we're not going to do that. We don't have to do that. We're a better team. People have higher expectations. I'm going to play this way. And yet Kenyon Green is acting like a folding chair and he's not adapting. And we saw him adapt so beautifully last year that I think is the more sort of, I throw my hands up at that question of like, well, if you adapted with less last year and you have more this year, how are we not covering up this very obvious hole that not only we see, but of course everybody else sees as well? In terms of CJ, he's playing very steady. Steady, unfortunately, with the bar he set in his first year might not be good enough for people to say he avoided a sophomore slump, when if you chart it out historically, he's fine. He's doing great. We'll see how the Texans do around him, but I don't think there's any kind of worry about, he's a much worse quarterback this year than he was last year.
All I know is hold on, what time is it? It's 11:53 a.m. So in roughly 5 hours, I'm seeing Quinnen Williams go up against Kenyon Green one-on-one. And I don't care how shitty the Jets are this year. Like, I don't feel good about that at all. Like that by itself could completely ruin the game. So, Vegas had the Jets, who were a 2-6 team against a 6-2 team. They still had the Jets favored by 1.5. That is literally why. Yeah. Like that matchup is literally why. So, yeah, I don't know. It's not a normal 6-2 team, and it's not a normal 2-6 team. I'll tell you that much. One quick note, and then we'll get right back to the show. You guys are very familiar with Manscaped at this point because they've supported us forever. But they did just release a brand new addition to their grooming line that you might be interested in, called the Chairman Pro, which is an old school electric foil shaver that can give you a professional shave right at home. You can use either the skin-safe 4-blade foil for a smooth finish, or if you want a stubble look, they have multiple options for the stubble trimmer to give you either a 1 to 2 day look or a 3 to 4 day look. depending on your preference. It's also waterproof, so you can use it in the shower if you want, and it makes it easier to clean too because you can just rinse it under the sink. It also, of course, has an LED spotlight so you can see every hair you're trying to shave, and it has up to 75 minutes of runtime. So if you're in need of a new shaver to maintain your stubble or to have a fresh and smooth face every single day, check out the Chairman Pro at Manscaped. And of course, check out everything else they have to offer too, whether it's body trimmers, lotion, shave gels, nose hair trimmers. I mean, you name it, they have it when it comes to grooming. You can see it all at manscaped.com, and if you use promo code BOOTLEG, you'll also get a 20% off discount and free shipping on your order. Again, that is manscaped.com, promo code BOOTLEG. That will give you 20% off and free shipping on whatever you get. Thank you to Manscaped for sponsoring today's show, and with that, let's get back to it. Now, next narrative here for a team that is also near and dear to me, the LA Chargers, who I work with. And you all know that by now, because if you go to Chargers games, you see me on the Jumbotron every single Sunday doing sports science segments. But we had a message from Arch here on Twitter, who's a Chargers fan, and he said what the media gets wrong is they say the pass rush is the best unit of the Chargers defense when it's the depleted secondary. And I'll tee you up, EJ, with this. Fun stat about this Chargers defense, which is a unit that people generally are not paying attention to nationally. Out of every single defense in the last 15 years, so 480 total defenses, 32 teams, 15 years, they are the 11th best defense in a decade and a half in terms of scoring drive percentage allowed. They are up there with the 2017 Jags. They're up there with the Browns from last year. Like, they're actually outpacing the Browns from last year. Like, this is a historically good Chargers defense, and one of the best Chargers defense, if not the best Chargers defense, since probably that 2006 team that went on a run.
So I think the way we're going to set this up is the old tired, wired, inspired. So tired is Chargers defense sucks. Well, the Chargers defense did suck for a long time. And if you don't pay attention to the Chargers, you might think they still suck. You couldn't be farther from the truth. Chargers defense was one of the main reasons for the team's downfall in recent years. And yes, that has been a repeated narrative. And that was after hiring a coach that was supposedly a skilled defensive mind. So something like that's going to leave a mark, did leave a mark. That's a lasting impression. Hey, we hired this guy that's supposed to make our defense great. And our defense keeps falling on its face no matter how many names we have on it and really whatever he does, any adjustments he makes. So that's the tired opinion. The wired one is the Chargers defense is really good because it is. Minter's turnaround has been miraculous in its speed and totality. Number one scoring defense, only 9 TDs allowed all year. They're 8th in least amount of yardage allowed, 5th lowest EPA per play allowed, and 6th least amount of yak allowed. This defense has gone from the bottom of the barrel to the top of the heap. And it's hard for folks to pivot from a long-standing narrative, 3-4 years, persisting, being the same way, to things that turn on a dime and go from very bad to very good in a short period of time. So again, if you don't watch the Chargers, you think their defense is garbage. If you do watch the Chargers, you go, holy crap, we have a good defense. Well, you're going to talk about the inspired piece, which is really what Arch was talking about in his tweet to us, which is, yes, they're good, but on top of that, there's a reason that they're good, and people are pointing at the wrong things. Because of all this whiplash, they're looking at the biggest names or the biggest contracts on the roster and say, that's it. That must be the reason. See, I said they were going to turn us around, and they have. And that's not exactly true.
Yeah, because when you look at Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa and Tuli, like that whole trio just by itself, you're like, oh, they're just getting pressure constantly and making quarterbacks' life hell. But they're actually not. And that's kind of by design, too. Jesse Minter, when he was coming in, obviously he comes from that Ravens tree, which goes all the way back to Rex Ryan in the mid-2000s. And even further back, it goes back to Cincinnati when John Harbaugh was at Cincinnati, even with Jesse's dad. So, like, it's, again, this is a true family tree in every sense of the word. But, he comes from that Ravens DNA, which is very fire zone heavy. We talked about fire zones earlier. Like, they call every kind of fire zone, every different way that you can rush 5 bodies at a quarterback, they do it. And so when Jesse came over with Harbaugh, I was like, oh, this can be a very blitz heavy defense. They're not. Like, they're not a blitz heavy defense. about average actually in blitz rate, about 26%. They're 25th in sim rate, so they're not even close to the Packers in that regard. Packers call about 3 times as many sims as they do. And even with the pass rush talent they have, they're 23rd in pass rush win rate and they're 22nd in pressure rate. They're 15th in stunt percentage. And you would think, okay, if their pass rush doesn't blitz a lot and they don't get a super high amount of pressures, how does this work? Like, how are they still 11th in sack percentage, without getting a whole bunch of pressure? How are they not allowing scoring drives? Like, the math ain't mathin', right? Literally, the only reason this works is because the secondary is playing out of its mind. It's not full of big names. Like, obviously, you got Derwin and you got Asante Jr. And like, there's players that people know, and people have known Derwin for a long time. But it's all the contributors from the Yeoman in this set. Like, you got Cam Hart making plays, right? You got Christian Fulton making plays. Like, there is a hive mind in this Chargers secondary that has played so outrageously good. Their communication is exceptional. They tackle well. They compete for every single ball. And because of that competitiveness and discipline on the back end, this team is 11th in sack percentage. So that only happens if a quarterback literally has nowhere to throw the ball. It's not about the pass rush winning. It's about the secondary winning. And they just don't lose. Like, this team is 6th in throwaways forced, not because the pressure is getting there immediately, just because there's nowhere to throw the ball, right? They're 3rd in scrambles forced because the quarterback has nowhere to throw the ball. So they break the pocket just to try to find something, and there's nothing there. And so the pass rush then cleans it up. That's how they get a lot of their sacks, is not just from like initial pressure from Bosa or Mack, but just because the quarterback has to hold the ball forever. They're 31st in average depth of target at 6.9 because there's nothing ever open downfield. There's no busts in coverage ever. They're 31st in terms of first down or touchdown percentage allowed on throws at 28.8%. We're going to get to the Ravens in a little bit. Spoiler alert, they're way fucking higher. Like, they're way, way higher than the Chargers. They do allow a fairly high completion percentage at 70%. And their open target percentage is also super high as well at 60%. So 60% of all the targets are to open receivers. But those open receivers are like running backs as checkdowns. So they just rally and tackle. So I look at this team and they play, again, that kind of Ravens Fangio style. And people forget that Fangio got a lot of what Fangio does from Rex. Like, he was with the Ravens in the late 2000s. It's a lot of quarters, a lot of quarter, half. They don't blitz. They don't stunt. They don't sim. They just play their coverage, and they don't mess it up. They play disciplined. They attack the ball in the air. They tackle. They compete on every single target. And eventually quarterbacks figure out that they can't fit balls into tight windows against this secondary, so they hold on to it, and they try to run, and then they get sacked. Like, they do that every single play over and over and over again, and then they just crush you. They're like a python, man. Honestly, they're like the defensive version of Jim Harbaugh's ideal offense. Like, that python type defense that just doesn't give anything up. And it works, but it only works because the secondary is really, really good.
And I think it gets glossed over because you see a lot of completions, again, to open receivers. But this is the defense not only inviting, but telling and forcing you where to throw that ball. Like, this is the guy you're going to throw to on this play. And he is 3 yards past the line of scrimmage, and we are going to hit him when he is 4 yards past the line of scrimmage. And that's as far as he's going. So that's the one thing we're going to give you that's open. We're going to cover everything else so tightly that you're eventually going to go, well, it's that or nothing. And I guess I'll get that. And we're going to make you do that 12 times, 13 times, 14 times to get down the field. And at some point, we're going to get a break. You're going to miss. The guy isn't going to be in the right hole, whatever. Doesn't matter. But we're just going to tell you where you're going to throw the ball. And that's probably the most impressive thing about this defense to me, is that they are dictating to offenses, this is what you can do, and you can't do anything else. So you might as well just do that. And the offense kind of throws up their hands and, like you said, goes to a scramble drill or whatever. It gets frustrating. right? As an offense to go, this is literally the only thing open. If you go back over to your coach on the sideline as a quarterback and he's like, what are you doing? Why don't you push the ball down the field? And you literally pull up the tablet. You're like,
I can't.
where do you want me to
Yeah.
push it? I can't. This is the only guy that's open. That's why I'm taking it. And everybody at that point realizes, oh, like they're controlling this game from the defensive side. And this is how they're doing it. And so far, nobody's really cracked that theory this year.
I highly advise, if you can, to the people watching and listening at home, just watch a Chargers game this year. Like, you're going to come away so impressed with that defense. And they have talent. Like, they have plenty of talent. But, like, this roster isn't even fully built yet. Like, they don't even have all the guys that they probably want yet in terms of, like, archetypes. So I can only imagine what it's going to be like in a couple years. I hope they're able to keep Jesse Minter for more than 2 seasons. Hell, I hope they're able to keep Jesse Minter for more than 1 season at this point. I don't know if they will, because he's amazing. But like this defense is for real, and they are far ahead of schedule compared to even what I thought they were. Like, I thought they were going to be a top 10 defense going into this year. I didn't think they were going to be top 1, but they are, because Jesse Minter is amazing. Now, speaking of the Ravens, we kind of alluded to them in that segment. But next narrative here that the media gets wrong. This comes from King Rex, who I assume is a Ravens fan. He says, people in the national media don't realize how truly terrible the Ravens' pass defense is, like historically bad. And I do want to slightly object to that, because I did know the Ravens' defense, pass defense specifically, was bad. It's just when I poured into the data, I didn't know how bad they were. And especially when comparing them to the Chargers, who we just talked about, it is a sizable gap between the top and the bottom of the league. And the Ravens are at the bottom. It almost feels like the Ravens and the Chargers just kind of swap places, because last year the Ravens defense was amazing and the Chargers defense sucked. And this year it's completely opposite. But it's kind of scary, like how shitty this pass defense is. And here's a few numbers just to kind of set the table for you, EJ. So they're the second highest in terms of first down or touchdown percentage allowed per throw at 40%, right? So 40% of the time when somebody drops back against the Ravens, it's going to be a first down or a touchdown. They have the third highest yards allowed per coverage snap. They have the third highest average yards per reception at 12. So every time somebody catches the ball, they're getting 12 yards, which is good God. They have the most contested targets allowed at 33. This was something specifically I want to hit on. Like, if you're watching the Bills game, if you're watching the Bengals game, even if you're watching the Cowboys game, which, I mean, the Ravens blew them out. But if you're watching any Ravens game this year, this team gives up fades down the sideline at kind of like an obnoxiously high rate. Like 50-50 balls are 70-30 against them. And especially Brandon Stevens. I mean, he got baptized. Like Devontae Adams really, really destroyed him. Basically every single Bills receiver destroyed him down the sideline. Like, this guy has given up more back shoulder fades in an 8-week span than I think I've ever seen in my life. And the fact that the Ravens lead the league in contested targets allowed, or contested catches allowed, does not shock me. I think he's given up half of them by himself in 8 weeks. He's given up 23 first downs. Like, by himself. Marlon's playing well. Hamilton's playing well. Nobody else is playing well. And Brandon Stevens in particular is getting obliterated out there. When they're calling all their fire zones and you're supposed to play a tight third, which is basically like, I am 2 to 3 yards over the top of the receiver and I am keeping myself in range so that I can break on anything, like a dig, I can break on a comeback. He's like 6 yards over the top, just allowing free dig routes. He's just completely conceding the space. And then when he's in press coverage, like, he doesn't even turn to look for the ball. So quarterbacks just heave it up and they're like, yeah, this is probably going to be complete. And it is. Like, it's unreal how bad he's played this year. And if they just had any other corner that they could play over Brandon Stevens, I'd bet you this defense isn't bottom 3. Maybe they're like bottom 15, but that's better than bottom 3, right? I don't want to entirely blame it on just one guy, but he's like the Kenyon Green of corners right now to me. Like, it kind of is just one guy to me. but they've also allowed the most receiving touchdowns across all teams at 17. They've allowed at least one touchdown per game of 20 plus yards, which is unbelievably bad. Keep in mind the Cardinals, everybody clowns on the Cardinals defense. They've allowed one passing touchdown over 20 yards the entire year. The Ravens are allowing one a week. Like, this defense sucks. They're not good. And it's not that Zach Orr is a bad DC. I don't think he is a bad DC. I think he's actually a great coach. He's been there as an assistant for some really good Ravens defenses. It's not like he doesn't know what he's doing. But his DBs lose every play. Like, they drafted Wiggins for this exact reason, but it's not enough. Like, they need like 3 more corners, I swear to God, or just DBs in general to make this work, because they just can't cover anybody.
So a couple things at play here, and it's interesting that you say it's almost like the Chargers and the Ravens swap positions, specifically in terms of pass defense. We said this about the Chargers defense last year. Like, they had a corner that was working. He's not working anymore, so they tried him in press. That didn't work. They tried him in off. That was worse. Nothing's working when you have a cog in your defense that you're counting on that can't basically play his responsibility. This is the kind of thing that happens. But to move it back a little bit farther than that, the Ravens pass defense has been so good for so long that any drop off is going to feel like a loss of identity. Here's the thing that we were really good at, and suddenly, seemingly, we just can't do it at all. So you talked about Zach Orr, and it's kind of unavoidable. You have one of the best coaches in the league moving on. It's almost impossible to play at the same level. There's going to be some drop-off, and any drop-off is going to feel big. So does it mean Zach Orr is a horrible coach? No, it doesn't. But when you follow in, big footsteps, you got big shoes to fill, and that's just the way it goes. That being said, like you said, the drop-off has been more than that. The drop-off has been very sharp, going from a great pass defense to, they're average. Nope, they're not average. They're 4th worst in EPA per play versus the pass, the 4th most amount of yak allowed in the entire league, 7th worst scoring defense overall because of it, 8th most yards against. They're just giving up everything. They're giving up points, they're giving up receptions, they're giving up yards, they're giving up explosive plays. You laid it out. They're just not really good against anything in terms of the pass. If there are bright spots on this defense, and there are, and yes, I realize this is silver lining a very bad situation. 4th best EPA versus the run, so still very solid against the run. And they do have the 4th most sacks in the league, which surprised me given how awful their pass defense is overall.
Well, I think it's just because teams know they can throw against them. So they're like, if we lose 7, we'll get back 19 on the next play. Like, we're fine.
Sure. And again, we goes all the way back, brings it all the way back to the beginning of this episode. And we talk about, the Packers defense, and the word I used was cohesiveness. This defense right now has no cohesiveness. Very good against the run, creating a good amount of pass rush pressure, can't stop anything versus the pass, just completely unhinged. And because of that, it's just like having a leak in a water tank, right? It doesn't matter how much you pour in, it's all pouring out the bottom. And that's kind of the way the Ravens pass defense feels right now. And that's got to be extremely jarring for Baltimore fans, because it's been a strength for so long to not only go, we're down, halfway in the standings too. Oh my God, please don't look. We're bouncing off the bottom here, and we have no idea what that feels like. It makes it feel even worse.
And I say this as somebody who loves Eddie Jackson. Buddy, it's time.
Yeah, no.
It's time.
It's been time for a bit. And time comes for all players in this league. And when it shows up, there's no hiding it. Everybody knows. And I don't disagree with you.
Again, we don't necessarily enjoy being negative on this show, but there is nothing else we could say about this Ravens defense. I can't put lipstick on that pig.
Nope. But here's the flip side. We're not being negative. You brought it up, fans.
Yeah.
We're just playing it out.
It's your fault.
That's right.
All right. Last take here, which is equally doom and gloom, but I think Saints fans are just begging for somebody to talk about it. This comes from Rocco Pellegrino. Great name, by the way. He says what the national media gets wrong is the cap situation being the reason for the Saints' downfall. Yes, it's making it harder to get off contracts for older players, but people just tweet out the raw amount of money that they're over the cap and they think it's newsworthy. The real crime is missing in the draft. I want to preface this by saying EJ and I are national media, but we have talked about this in the past. I just wanted to bring it back up again because I don't think enough national media are talking about the Saints draft history, and that being the reason why ultimately they keep doing all these cap shenanigans, right? Because this team is not deep. And the cap shenanigans, to a degree, makes sense, right? If you're predicting a certain percentage of cap space growth, or rather of the salary cap growing every single year due to revenue, like if you're projecting out 7% growth year over year over year, like that covers up for a lot of what they do. And then they just kind of keep doing it over and over and over again and saying, okay, well, if we have 40 million more in space to work with in like 2 years, like, well, that's their line of thinking. It's hard for me to talk about it without visual aids, so I'll probably just do a whole episode on it at some point to like really explain what the hell they're doing. But there is a method to the madness. That's why they keep doing it every year for the last decade, right? But the only way that they really, really got away with it was when they nailed that 2017 draft. And I'm going to read off what they got that year to set the stage for everything that happened after that, right? So in 2017, where they were still in cap trouble, they got Marshawn Lattimore, Ryan Ramczyk, Marcus Williams, Alvin Kamara, Alex Anzalone, Trey Hendrickson. Their entire third round was Kamara, Anzalone, and Trey Hendrickson, and then they got Al-Qadim Muhammad in the 6th round. They hit on literally every single pick. Like literally every single pick became a contributor all the way up to a star, whether it was for their team or another team, right? And what that allowed them to do was still have good talent for no money so that they could play all these financial games with their older players that cost a lot more. And at the time it was Drew Brees, right? They were hanging on to Drew as long as possible. And as long as you can keep doing that, like the finances make sense. But in the years following that, in 2018, they took Marcus Davenport in the 1st round, which I believe was a trade up with 2 first-round picks for the Packers to get Davenport. Didn't exactly work out for him. They took Traquan Smith that year. Again, didn't exactly work out for him. They got Boston Scott in the 6th round, but he ended up being an Eagles legend, not a Saints legend. They got Will Clapp in the 7th round, but in between it's Rick Leonard, Natrell Jamerson, Cameron Moore, guys that never contributed. In the following year, they got Eric McCoy, who's still there with them, and they got CJ Gardner-Johnson, who is not still there with them. He's on like team number 4. But that was basically it. And then you get to 2021 with Peyton Turner, who did not work out for them. Pete Werner, who has worked out, but again, he's a linebacker, and there's only so much value that Pete Werner can bring to this defense as a linebacker by himself. And he's certainly not going to save their pass rush, which is vastly underperforming this year, even though they put picks into it with Davenport and Turner. If they're not working out, you're not going to have a pass rush, right? They got Paulson Adebo, who has worked out, but then they took Ian Book in the 4th round for whatever reason. And then Landon Young and Quan Baker. And then in 2022, you get Chris Olave, and then they trade up for Trevor Penning. Eesh. Okay. Again, you can see this pattern of trading up for players that they're missing on in the 1st round, which is costing them depth. And then you get Alontae Taylor, who worked out, DeMarco Jackson, Jordan Jackson. And then last year, it's kind of early for these guys, Bresee and Foskey. I can't remember how many edge rushers that I just listed off in like the last 6-7 years. I don't think any of them hit. And then people wonder why their pass rush isn't good. But you see this pattern of them mortgaging future picks to go up and target specific players that don't work out for them. And they're consistently hitting on day 2, right? You get Kamara, you get Werner, you get Hendrickson. Like they're actually pretty good on day 2, but they keep, instead of trading down and getting more day 2 picks, they're trading up and getting more day 1 picks that aren't working. And that's how their depth has been completely depleted, because they are costing themselves of those day 2 and early day 3 picks that are productive and dirt cheap. That is why they're in the position they're in, where when they take injuries to the offensive line, they don't have the depth to fill in. And so the offense completely falls apart. When they take injuries at receiver to Shaheed, then it just becomes the Chris Olave show and they don't have anybody else. I look at this roster that when all 22 of their frontline starters are on the field, they can compete. When they miss like one guy, they don't have anything else because they keep giving all their picks away and they don't have the money to bring in cheap depth through free agency. So yes, the national media does kind of overblow the cap stuff a little bit, but also, yes, the national media completely ignores that this team has fucked itself in the draft by trading up for guys that don't work.
Couple of things at play here. One, you started off with it. 2017, generally in draft circles that we run it and everybody else runs in, is regarded as the gold standard. Nobody hits on every pick. Well, the Saints did that year. And they've been middle of the pack since, but there's two other things that I think fuel this misconception. One is that you can do one thing really well in team building and make a good team. And the answer is no, you can't. You need to do all things well in team building to make a good team. You have to draft pretty well. You have to be smart in free agency. If you miss wildly in either one of those, it will catch up with you over time. I mean, famously, we saw that the Packers for a long time just would not invest in the free agency market. They're very good in the draft, but they just refused to sign free agents. Now, that's ancient history at this point. They got off that because they realized, oh, we need to do both well to compete. And other teams that have done well at one thing and not the other, it always ends up that they come up short. So you can't just do one thing well. And the other thing that really fuels this is the misperception of what the draft really is and what hit rates really are and what it's there for, what the value and the worth of third round and fourth round and fifth round and sixth round picks are, and how you need to balance them and how you can occasionally bundle them together and go after somebody up high, and what misses up high really do. And the Saints kind of have all of that in the history that you laid out, bundling picks to go get guys that didn't work out, not drafting and developing well down the board, having guys that you drafted and didn't succeed in your organization go on, like Zach Bond and Boston Scott, to, succeed in other places. All of those things drain your talent. So while every year is not going to be 2017, because it isn't for anybody, that's literally the one time it happened in modern history, you do need to be consistent about the draft. And if you are going to move up one year, you probably need to move down the next year and multiply your chances. And still, you have to pick the right guys, and still you have to develop them within your organization. Now, that is a really hard thing to do. Best evidence for that, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And nobody does it. Great hit rate in the draft is 35%. If you have a year where you get two really good starters and two really good guys that contribute for you and hang around on your team and play as backups, you did pretty well. 4 out of 7 picks that are contributing. It's a great hit rate. It's higher than normal. So when people look back at these drafts and all the talents moved on or just plain old missed, over time, I don't care what you're doing with your finances, and the Saints have been as creative as anybody in the league, you can't buy your way out of it. There's not enough money in free agency. And the positions that they're missing on, specifically edge rusher, are really expensive. So you can only maybe go get one. And like you said, top level talent. If he's on the field, great. If he's not, he's off. You talked about the injury to Shaheed, and Olave's had concussions at the same time. And then you're really down to, oh, geez, did we hit on any fifth round wide receivers? Do we have any undrafted free agents from local schools that have, just killed it? Not as many as they need. Now, good news, again, if we're going to talk about silver lining, early returns on this year's class are looking pretty good, but they are early returns. Fuaga's been great. McKinstry's played pretty well. Spencer Rattler is what he is. We'll see how that works out, but he at least looks like he can play at the NFL level, certainly as a backup. Bub Means has contributed a little bit. We haven't seen a ton from Jalen Ford, Christian Boyd, we know has talent. We got to talk to him at Shrine Bowl. Like, that looks like it could be one of those really good drafts where you get a couple of very good high-level starters, 2 or 3 guys that contribute in different ways to your team. Those are the kinds of drafts you need to have year after year. And the Saints have certainly not done that. They had this super high in 2017. And then there are whole drafts where you go through and you're like, well, that guy is a starter when he's healthy. And this other guy, well, he was on the team for 4 or 5 years before he left and started somewhere else. And that's it out of 7 picks or 8 picks or 9 picks. Over time, that will catch up with you. I don't care how your financial management goes. I don't care how successful you are or not without free agents. It will gut your team, and you will end up in a spot very much like you talked about where your frontline talent looks okay, but injuries happen. It's a 17-game season, and you just generally fight this battle of attrition, and you don't have enough bullets.
And I just love the irony of like the one edge rusher they drafted since Cam Jordan that worked out, Trey Hendrickson. He's in Cincy.
It didn't work for them. Yep.
You know, it's like he played well for them too. And then because of the financial hole that they dug themselves into, like walking out the door, you know?
Yep.
So it's just, I don't know. It's funny how that works out sometimes. Like they spend so many resources and so many picks to get an edge, and their best ones in the 3rd round. Same thing happened to the Raiders. You know, they take Farrell at like 4th overall, 6th overall, whatever it is. And then, Max Crosby, their 4th rounder from that year, is the one that works out. You never really know. All right. Fun show. Very fun show. There were some points that you guys brought up that I agreed with, some that I kind of disagreed with. And there were some points that you guys made that made me look at situations completely differently than how I was before, which is kind of the point of this show, right? Is to allow you guys to give your opinions as fans that follow these teams closer than anybody, to let us know what we're getting wrong and what we're getting right. EJ, any final words?
I agree with you. This is a fun show. It was a cool chance to sort of open up the floor and say, what do y'all think? We saw some great ones. We saw some bad ones. We saw a lot of recency bias where people were saying, yeah, they've been this way for years, but if you watched them in the last 2 weeks, they've turned the corner. I'm like, oh, buddy, like they can turn the corner back around just as quickly. So great.
Just look at the Bears.
Yeah, exactly. Great end-to-end show. And keep watching those trends, because that's how trends become trends. They start. If you were in on it super early and it continues and it turns around the way the national media needs to look at your team, that's awesome. That's what being a fan is all about, is saying, you know, this thing could happen and we're here at the very beginning of it. And we get to see the sort of genesis of that success. It's one of the great joys as a fan. So really enjoyed sort of enjoying that with you all this week, and hopefully we'll do it again soon sometime.
Before we get out of here, we want to thank all of our executive producers over on the Bootleg Football Patreon: Fitzy, Andrew, Connor, Eichen, Liam, and Mike. Thank you all once again for riding with us for this long and making this show possible. I don't think I have anything else for you, so we will see you at some point. Oh, wait, no, we don't have a Monday show. Okay, so we'll see you later in next week. How about that?